Oh, yeah, well, yeah. But remember that. I don't think I was that hat. Couldn't buy any adult beverages. It's an Uzo. Some Uzo? Yes.
I never had it. What's it taste like?
But it's yeah. But I was going to try it over there, but I'm not supposed to have alcohol.
Well, let's call this meeting to order. City of North Kansas City operating budget year 2017-18. Mr. Eric.
Well, thank you, sir. This is our opportunity to try to gang up on you and have more people here than you are, so we can try to persuade you to agree to our proposed budget for the year. What we typically do these days is have two work sessions. The first one in which you get an overview of the budget and we kind of focus on operations. And then a second one, which is scheduled for a week from now, where we tend to focus on capital projects. But we'll try to be ready for any questions you might have on any budgetary matter tonight. How we usually start is because Parks and Recreation and the library are separate budgets. They are included in this document, but they are both approved by their governing boards. And so we usually have Parks and Recreation, Library present to you first and get that out of the way, and then they can be excused, and then I present you an overview of the budget, and then the departments kind of go through it department by department, hit the highlights of their budgets, and answer any questions you might have. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kelly Batifka to present to you the Parks and Recreation Board's budget for proposed budget for fiscal year 2018.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, Mayor, council members. For revenue this year, we looked at some areas to increase for considering of looking at the facilities, hopefully the new Parks and Recreation Center facilities, to bring in some revenue from that. But I was kind of a little hesitant on how much to increase that. Did a $6,000 increase. I think I was pretty gun shy on that, but I'm not knowing what exactly next year will bring with that. And we've also increased our senior citizens trips, $12,000, because our senior trips are growing rather well and have brought in a significant amount of revenue this year that we hope to match next year. And then for our operating expenses, we had to take a real good look at all of our utilities for the new facility, where we had to do a substantial increase for electricity, gas, water, and include a new line item of building maintenance for this year, which we've never had before. And then also general liability was an increase for the new facility that we had to have a $6,000 increase that we received kind of a rough estimate quote from our current insurance provider. And just for clarification on for this year, we are showing to be 56,439,000 short. 8,438 of that is in the operating expenses, which I briefly mentioned earlier that I think I was gun shy on our revenue proposals with the new facility. So the hope is we'll break even this year, and that $48,000 difference is capital improvements, which we'll go over next week, but is also which was pulled from our fund balance, which is what the fund balance reserve is for. I think that's all. Is there any questions?
Can you give us that last number on the 56,000, and then how much of it was? What was it again? The 48,000 was what?
Yeah, 8,439 is over on operating expenses, but that was because I was gun shy on our projected revenue for the new facility. So I think we'll break even with kind of our revenue that we're bringing in now, and hopefully the new facility with the rentals that'll project us even higher. And then the 48,000 is for capital improvements, which we'll discuss next week.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
My understanding is that when you have the big bands down at the park, that's funded by the tourism fund?
Yes, the Friday in the park, the afternoon concerts, and then the 3 Friday night concerts are all funded through tourism, correct? So just to help you out, all of our special events that are documented or taken out of our line operating budget cost is our Halloween event, all of our dog events, Princess Formal, if we have an Easter, which we do sometimes every other year, and we help partner with Arts in the Park, our Friday night in June where we do a night out, which we partner with the Municipal Services, Police and Fire. So all those type of events are what our special events budget covers.
Anybody else?
Some items, just, you mentioned convention and tourism, so just some items that are covered that you might think of as Parks and Recreation events. Include the mayor's tree lighting, that's out of convention and tourism. As Kelly mentioned, the park concert series, the Friday night concerts, and the Arts in the Park Festival are all showing in the convention and tourism fund. I think,
Okay.
does Mr. DeLong have a
Yeah, I
question?
got it.
Yeah.
So do you do any work on any of those events, though? The Friday night concerts, the Christmas tree lighting?
Yes, we,
Okay.
we coordinate, plan, organize, do all of those.
So do you charge any of those hours to tourism?
No, we do not.
Okay, so
That's
that
all
all shows an
staffing hours.
expense on you.
Yes.
But okay.
Yep. And I do help with Friday in the Park. I do work with Ken Rimmert to do all of the marketing, putting the schedule together and things of that nature. But the actual concert itself is on him, and Municipal Services helps set up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions about Parks and Recreation, call on Vicki Lewis to present the library fund budget.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, council, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to present the library budget. I would like to introduce the library board members that are here tonight. Some of you may be familiar with them. Otherwise, I'd like to go ahead and announce that Vivian Kieschlik is here, Tony Craycraft, Lisa Degginger, Kay Hedrick, Shelley Pinto, and Kathy Perry. And I'd also like to thank them for showing up tonight in support of us. Mayor and council members, if I could have like 2 to 5 minutes, I'd like to just briefly mention something that happened at the library this year that I think is a very positive development that I'd like to inform everyone about, if I might. Okay. We received grants to purchase some supplies and equipment to set up our textile makerspace, which we're going to call Common Threads. It's something we've thought about for several years. We haven't had the opportunity to do that. We were approached and asked if we had any interest in or had a event or program that we'd like to provide to the community, and we received the grants to do this. So we've purchased 12 sewing machines, numerous yards of fabric, sewing notions, and other equipments to set up this makerspace. It's going to be a textile makerspace, and it's going to allow many opportunities for the community to foster connections, build the community. They're going to be able to connect, explore, discover, and grow. They're going to learn something new, and they're going to be able to connect with someone and share the interest. We're working with a local sewing expert who's offering both techniques and project-based classes, and we're offering beginning sewing classes and people that would like to get back into sewing that have been at it for a while but just want to reconnect. We're looking forward to creating a permanent location in the southwest corner of the lower level of the library for this makerspace to store all the equipment and to offer the programs. In this permanent home, we also want to offer an open sew session, which is kind of like a designated slot time period where the community can just come in and use the equipment if they need to. They can kind of set aside some time with us and say, I'd like to come in, use the sewing machine, some of the equipment, some of the different things that we have to offer. And it's kind of like borrowing a book. They'll be borrowing the sewing equipment, and it will be inside the library. It's not something we're going to check out to take home. We eventually want to offer instruction, materials, and other related textile skills like knitting, crocheting, and different fabric arts, tie-dyeing, or paper making, different things along those lines. We just want to build, but this is the starting point. I just want to let you know that we're very excited to have the opportunity that we had, and that we're able to move forward with it and have something that we can offer to the community that we haven't been able to before, something new that we can do.
Sounds interesting. Yeah.
Regarding that, that's a really neat idea, I think, and I think a lot of people might use it. When you're having like the textiles and doing the classes and where people can come in and work on the machines. I don't know if it's possible at all. Have you ever thought of having like a little sale of like certain textiles like denim or cotton or anything like that? Or is that even come to the realm? Or is
Did you
that-
say sell, like sell it?
Like sell
for-
it to like people that want to come in and maybe make a shirt or something, or make,
No, we really hadn't thought about selling any fabric or anything like that. This is all free to the public. We don't charge them for anything. They come in, we provide everything they're gonna need to make the projects. We provide the instructor to instruct how to do it, the patterns to do it, and things like that. We hadn't really anticipating selling anything to anyone.
sure, it'll be more of a classroom setting then,
Yes.
you're saying? Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question? Yeah, could you and Kelly work together on some of this stuff, you know, like the tie-dyeing? And, you know, I noticed that you offer that. There's no sense in offering it twice, you know. I mean, if we could all get together and work, you know, I think it'd work out real well for everybody.
I'm sitting here taking notes of what we can do together, so.
Okay.
And we haven't offered anything like that yet. We're want to try to get everything set up before we can. We don't really have a location at this time that we can do some of these things because we kind of have to keep it simple until we really have an area designated for it. But we plan to grow, and obviously we can grow and help each other out with some of these things too.
Are you gonna teach anybody to darn socks? Shelley needs to know.
I think that's a dying art. I don't know. It's almost cheaper now to buy a new pair of socks than to go to the trouble to buy the thread and the needle for it.
Okay.
Vicki, this might be something of interest for the seniors.
Uh-huh.
I don't know for sure how much, we have a lot of people that do similar things, and you might want to focus on some type of a brochure or some kind of a educational commitment to let people know down there that there might be something that they might be involved in.
Right, and we've even considered maybe in the future making it a mobile unit where we can maybe, if, like the Gardens Apartments, I know they have community areas, if maybe they would like us to bring down some machines and let the people there in the apartments that can't get out as easily, that they can maybe come and work on projects there.
That'd
We
be
haven't gotten that far yet because we're just kind of getting it off the ground, but we just think the possibilities are endless. We even know that there's some teenagers that are having interest. We have had a few classes already, and we have had some young, I want to call them young adults that have come to the classes. They have an interest. So I think we could do some that are geared toward them, and we've had people comment that we could do expectant mother classes where like you could do, we could have sessions, like 1 month we'll have one project and next month another where they can make, you know, different things like bibs and, you know, move on down the line like that. So it's just,
That sounds good. If someone could let me know, I could see to it that it got put in the newsletter down there.
okay,
Whenever you're comfortable with, you know, coming up with the program, let me know, and I'll see to it that we can put a little verbiage in our monthly newsletter.
okay, I'll do it. Okay, any more questions? Okay, I'll move on to the budget. For our revenue, our current property tax levy is .3031, so a little over 30 cents. And for property tax, we're going to be bringing in $967,100. Our other revenues are $25,100. Most of that is from miscellaneous. A little bit of it's from state aid, Missouri state aid. The miscellaneous revenue isn't always a revenue. Sometimes it's like if someone has lost a book and they pay for that lost item. So that's really a replacement. We're going to be replacing the item instead of having actual revenue. But some of it is revenue. Whenever we have copy charges, print charges, fax machine charges, things like that, it's basically to cover the cost of the machines, the toner, the paper, and so we have to replenish that as we go. So it's not totally a revenue either, but that is some that's in the revenue line. And then we also have some investment earnings, and it's been projected at about $5,000, which makes our total revenue of $997,200. Our expenditures this year we've had some fluctuation in personnel benefits. It's going to decrease about $22,000 this year. That is mainly from one of our employees has been full-time and they're going to go to part-time. It happens to be our security attendant. Later in the budget, we have added funds in case we want to hire Clay County sheriffs to supplement those days that he's not there. He's going to reduce down to 3 days a week, and we have already contacted Clay County Sheriffs to make them aware of the fact that we might want to utilize them 2 days a week. And we're working with them on time scheduling and who can fill the slots. Our administrative fees increased about 23%, so that's like $8,300. Our custodial services have increased. We recently changed custodial service, and our cost at the library was a little bit higher than the previous one. Plus, we've added a little additional funds for custodial services for the lower level after January, when Parks and Rec hopefully will have their new building built for them. And it won't be much more, but we've added a little bit for that. We've increased our advertising and marketing. We send out a mailer every fourth month, so triennial we send it out, and the cost of the printing and the postage has gone up a little bit, so we've increased that a little bit. Our other services has decreased a whopping amount of $75. That's due to a change in a subscription service that we have, and it was lowered, but then we're raising it because of the Clay County Sheriff, so it was almost a wash. Our automation services are going to decrease $2,500 this year. We are going to switch our library management service. That's the software or the service company that we use to actually provide the equipment to check books in and out, and to catalog our books and things like that. It's going to decrease $2,500 this year. We're anticipating a larger decrease next year. Our utilities are going to be increasing. Utilities are increasing everywhere, so we've added about $29,000. I'm hoping that's a high estimate, but I'd rather have it a little high than to come up short. That is mostly for the electricity. Water and phones are pretty well stable. We've increased building maintenance $13,000. We would like to enclose the lower level, southwest corner of the lower level, put a couple short walls in to make that the makerspace area. And in order to do that, we've got an estimate of how much it might cost to do that, to build a couple of walls and put in some doors. And so that was about $13,000, so we increased it by that amount. We've also increased our minor furniture amount by $10,000. We did that so that we can buy furniture for the lower level. We have a little bit of furniture that we can put in that area. However, we're going to need more. We're going to need some shelving for the young adult books that we plan to move back down there like they used to be down there. And $10,000 is kind of just a rough estimate of what it would cost us to do that. We've also increased our adult programming line $2,750. That is to include programming for the makerspace that we're going to be adding, and we're going to need instruction for that. Plus, the Veterans Day event, with the help of the council, we are going to have a banner this year across Armour Road, which should help advertise it and make it grow. And if it grows, then we're going to continue to need to offer more at the event. So we've added a little bit of money in the budget line for that. That's basically our total budget, how we have it planned for next year.
Are you still using an outside source from time to time for collecting on delinquencies?
Yes, we are.
How are they doing, and what's the, you don't probably get very much, I don't imagine, from them, do you?
No, we do not. They charge us, but we charge a patron. If a patron's sent to that referral company, then we charge the patron for that, so it's basically a wash. And they are doing very well. When we first started with them, which was about 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, we had a real high deficit of what people owed us in money. They have dwindled that down to the point where it's pretty much just current. What they collect now is just mostly current. It's not people that 5 years ago, or, so it does very well.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if it'd be this meeting or maybe the next meeting when we talk about capital outlay. I do see in here where there's $142,000 from the gaming fund, and $110,000 is for carpet.
Yes.
Okay, and can you just tell me when the last time the carpet, because I remember maybe the entryway was just done recently, but I don't know, is this for the whole library, or can you?
The library board recarpeted the entryway probably 3 or 4 years ago. Last year, we recarpeted, with the library's funds, the main area when you walk in the front doors. There were tears in the carpet, and We didn't have time to get it into the budget for the city budget for the building, for the capital expenditures. So we went ahead and carpeted that area. And the rest of this 110,000 is for the rest of the building. It has not been done since the building was built. So it is like, at this point, it's 16 years old. By the time it will be carpeted, it will be 17 years old.
Okay, thank you.
We were gonna recarpet it until we moved the park board down there. Then we decided
Right.
to wait until they moved out because they're kind of messy.
Right.
Okay, anybody else? Question. The people, are they reading as books, are checking out as many books as they used to, or are we going to the new tapes and records and all that kind of stuff, or?
The electronic books.
Yeah,
The electronic books, I think, hit their peak, and they're stabilizing now. There's not as many people that are moving towards that direction. It's still, at least in our library, and from most of the libraries I talk to, print is still the biggest read. However, there are people that still read with electronic. I do both. If I can't find what I want in paper, I might read electronically. There's some people that refuse to read electronically. Some people love it so much they don't read print anymore. So it's both ways. Sometimes it's more convenient to read electronically. It's easier to read if you can get a backlit device and you're reading in the dark. Or if you have trouble reading, you can enlarge the font on electronic. You can make it any size you want, which is very, very nice. I was just talking to Zach, and like we have the Kansas City Star electronically through the website as a resource that we offer. You can look at the you can look at the Kansas City Star, and you can enlarge the font on it as large as you want to read the Kansas City Star, which makes it a lot easier to read sometimes than the actual paper, because sometimes their words are so small it's hard to read. But it's a split. It's not growing as fast as what it was, and I don't think it hit the peak that everybody anticipated, but it's still a nice option.
books will never go away.
I don't think so.
Mayor, I'd like to commend the library on their large selection of large print material. That's very popular. A lot of people here need that large print for convenient reading, and you guys have a great selection of that, so keep it up.
Well, thank you. And one of the reasons is because the way I feel is anybody can read large print. I mean, whether you have good eyesight or bad, anybody can read large print. So I feel like it's always good to try to keep good copies of large print around.
Very good.
Bill.
I did solve the last board meeting for the library, and I did solve a problem for them. And they gave the report on how many books were checked out by young kids, juveniles, and the seniors lag behind. That's because we fall asleep when we read.
That's true.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, sir. Well, so with that, we'll delve into the rest of the budget. And I are pleased to submit this budget to you. I hope you find it useful as a means of encapsulating everything that we do during the course of the year. I'd like to begin by just kind of giving a broad overview of the entire budget, and then we'll kind of go through it fund by fund. Just in terms of the overall budget, all the different funds combined, the city is looking at spending about $45 million this year. We are looking at adding about 12 employees this year. Most of those are in public safety because the voters, as you know, did approve a new public safety sales tax, which we promised them, if it was approved, would add to the rosters of our police department and our fire department. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into those two departments, but that is where the bulk of the increase is on that increase in the number of employees that we have. In terms of compensation for all employees, of course, that is an important part of what we do. There are three major components to compensation in the city. Those are wages, pension and retirement benefits, and health insurance benefits. In terms of wages, this budget assumes a 2.75% merit-based pay increase for the full-time workforce in the aggregate as a whole. Some employees might get more depending upon how long they've been here and how highly they are evaluated, but as a whole, that is what is in the budget. One exception, the library board has decided to increase the salaries of its full-time and half-time staff by 5% in the next fiscal year. Employees represented by the fire and police unions are budgeted to receive increases in line with their respective collective bargaining agreement. In both cases, those are around 2.75%, which is in part why I determine the level for non-represented employees, because my goal is to try to put non-represented employees and represented employees on an even level to the greatest degree possible. Non-represented employees are not part of the modified step systems that were in the collective bargaining agreements for represented police and fire. So they will be evaluated and compensated according to the pay for performance system that the council adopted 2 years ago. But the increase for the non-represented employees, as I indicated, is in line with both what has been negotiated for our 2 unions, and also we did do a survey of what other cities in the Kansas City metropolitan area are doing, and they are in that general 2% to 3% range. So I think that we are doing about what others in the metro are doing, as well as keeping ourselves in line with what our represented employees are receiving per agreement with them. In terms of pension and retire, and by the way, stop me at any time if I'm saying anything. I'll try to pause now and then to give you an opportunity if you have any questions. But so the city's police and fire employees do participate in the police and fire retirement plan. That's mainly funded by a separate property tax levy. But there is additional funding that's provided by a 3.1% employee contribution and a 6.9% employer contribution of the total base salary of those employees. The Police and Fire Retirement Fund is an independent budget. It's not shown in this document. You won't see it anywhere in this document. But the general fund's contributions, as I mentioned, the employer contribution of total base salary, that is shown. The contribution into that fund is shown as an expenditure out of the general fund budget. The city's general employees, non-fire, non-police, participate in the Missouri Local Government Employee Retirement System, better known as loggers. City participates at the L7 level in the system. That's one of the highest levels in the logger system. And we are a contributory member, meaning that we pay both the employer and the employee shares into that program. Non-contributory members pay only the employer share, but the city is a contributory member. We pay both shares. The logger system adjusts the percentage of gross wages up to 1% a year as necessary to meet its funding requirements. They tell us what they are doing in terms of increasing that contribution or lowering it. And this year they told us that they are lowering it. I think it's the second year in a row that they're lowering it by 1%. So the fund is doing relatively well at the state level, and that does help our budget. Also, another element of our pension system is that for all full-time employees, the city matches employee contributions up to 3% for the 457 plan defined benefits. That is something that I encourage all of our employees to do because the city is generous in matching that. I think we have a good, strong retiree system that we have these different legs that are part of it. Yes, sir.
Probably about once a year, the city's asked to kick in to the police and fire pension
Yes, sir.
budget. Where is that at?
We budget that in the gaming fund.
Oh, I see, okay.
And we will talk about that when we get to gaming next week, but I can tell you that the amount that we have budgeted there is something like $187,000 this year, I believe. And the actuary gives us numbers, $181,811. And the actuary that serves the police fire pension fund has long-term projections, and we base our contribution upon what the actuary says will be necessary in order to
But is that money then added into the police and fire budget?
Yes, it is,
Okay.
as a revenue, to make sure that that fund is funded. The goal is to keep that fund funded at 100%.
Yeah.
So that brings it to 100%.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions about that before I move on to health insurance? Okay, the health insurance news this year is really very good. The fiscal year 2018 budget includes a little over $2 million for the city's share of employee medical, dental, and life insurance costs. In the proposed budget that is before you tonight, based upon the best information that we had at the time, the budget proposed an increase in health insurance premiums of 5%. That was what we were being told by our health insurance broker, Lockton Companies. But we have very recently learned, since the time that I submitted this budget to you, that that increase is only going to be 1.4%. And as you may recall, the increase was 0 last year. So we've had a couple of very good years. A few years ago, we had a very bad year, so you never know. But so far, it's been a good couple of years. Difference between what we budgeted and the numbers you see here in this budget is almost $45,000. So good news there. Another piece of good news that we can talk about is a health insurance rebate that we did receive in this fiscal year, which I reported to you at the time. We'll talk about a little bit later. That's kind of a very broad overview of all of the budget as a whole. Any questions before I get to the general fund? Okay. Well, moving on. First of all, I always like to talk about how we project to do in this fiscal year, because how we end this fiscal year sets the tone then for fiscal year 2018. We began the year with a higher balance than we had shown in the adopted fiscal year 2017 budget, about $304,000 more. And we budgeted a deficit. We projected a deficit in this fiscal year of about $686,000. We now think that we're going to come in with a surplus of about $273,000. So that's a difference of almost $1 million. So again, we're pretty healthy in the general fund. Revenues are projected at the end of the year about 2.8% higher than we originally budgeted, getting close to $400,000 more, and expenditures are projected at the end of the year about $580,000 lower than we had originally budgeted. That's about 4.1% less than we budgeted. So of course, it's always our goal to do a little bit better on revenues than we budgeted, to not spend quite as much as we budget, and we've done both. It appears that we're going to do both of those things in fiscal year 2017. On the revenue side, we're seeing higher revenues than anticipated in sales tax, licenses and permits, particularly building permits, where we've continued to have good, strong activity. Proceeds from the sale of surplus city property, which we do not budget for, because it's speculative. We don't know exactly what we might get. And then non-recurring revenue, such as the health insurance rebate that we received this year. We received, as I reported to you a little while ago, $251,000 in non-recurring revenue in the general fund as a result of our health insurance rebate. Well, that was total, actually. That was then spread amongst all the funds, excuse me. But very, very healthy health insurance rebate from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Some years we receive nothing. Some years we get something, but not that much. That was certainly a nice windfall. And that helped contribute to the surplus that we're looking at receiving this year. On the downside, we continue to see our long-term trend with Harrah's North Kansas City rent revenue decreasing. We do get in the general fund a revenue from the rental of the property that they sit on. In 2016, we received about $3,153,000. This year, it looks like we're going to get about $3,073,000, so about $80,000 less. So we had a little blip last year where it actually went up, but over time, it has continued to go down quite a bit over the years.
Have we got them paid back, what we owed them?
Yes, sir.
That's all paid?
Yes, sir, it is. Yeah. The mayor's referring to an underpayment that occurred. We made that up over several years. I think that ended a year before last. So, of note on the expenditure side, our expenses were quite a bit lower in the fire department, police department than we budgeted. Of course, those are the two largest departments in the general fund, so when we're under in those funds, that helps the general fund. So we're in pretty good shape, we think, finishing as we come into the end of 2017. Looking at 2018, We project now about $2 million more in revenue in 2018 than we expect in 2017. That's almost entirely because of the public safety sales tax. We expect about $1.7 million from that. That's a half-cent sales tax that was approved by voters. But we are also looking at some modest increases in general sales tax and our property taxes, and we think also continued growth in licenses and permits. And finally, as you may recall, we had a work session back in July where we talked about how we had done an analysis of the services that the general fund provides to all of the other funds in the city, and it determined that the general fund was being underpaid. And I proposed a schedule for increasing the amount that other funds contribute to pay back to the general fund for those services provided. And so that is another substantial revenue into the general fund, about another $224,000 more than we had been taking from those other funds before, based upon an analysis that showed that the general fund was giving more in services than it was receiving from those funds. Again, I mentioned the rental income from Harrah's. Just to let you know the sort of the magnitude of decrease. In 2007, we were looking at about $4,015,000 in revenue, and in 2018 we were projecting $3,050,000 in revenue. So we're down about $1 million over the last 11 years or so. That's a decrease of about 24%. So it's something to continue keeping an eye on. Obviously, it's still a very healthy and substantial revenue, which we're very lucky to have in the general fund. But it has been decreasing, and hopefully, one of these years it'll stabilize. But until it does, we continue to project modest decreases in that revenue, and it just simply reflects less casino activity.
Must be kind of frustrating because that's something you have very little, if any, control on whatsoever.
No, we really don't.
You just wish and hope.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But we've been able to make it up in other ways, and that's,
Now, okay, there's rental on the property, but then there's also income from the patrons that go.
Right.
On the growth.
From gaming and from admissions, those both go into the gaming fund. So
Okay,
we have three major revenues. One's from the rent, and then from the other two revenues. which go
$2
into
per person going through the.
Yes, $1 a head.
Pardon me?
$1 a head for
$1 a
admissions,
head.
and then there's a gaming sales tax, a gaming tax
Yeah,
that also is.
the rent is based on gross, or?
It's based upon gross receipts. Hold on just a second. I'll read you what we say here. So the city owns the land on which Harrah's operates. The casino pays the city an annual ground rent equal to the greater of 2% of adjusted gross winnings, or $2 million, whichever is more. So as I said, lately it's been a lot.
But it's better than the minimum.
The gaming revenue, yes, it is. Better than the $2 million minimum. Yes, sir.
I don't know, maybe I'm getting too far ahead of you.
Right.
It looks to me like for the first time in a long time anyway, the general fund structural deficit has been erased.
That's right. I will get to that in just a second, but that's correct. Just looking at expenditures, and then we'll talk about where that leaves us in terms of, we actually do project a small surplus at the end of this year. Of course, as I said, the fire department comprises about 39% of the general fund expenditures, and the police department about 34%. And our expenditures are proposed to be about $15.4 million in the general fund this year. It's about an 8% increase, again, mainly in fire and police for additional personnel. We are looking at 6 new sworn police officers and a civilian records unit officer, and 3 new firefighter paramedics and a management analyst in fire. And each of the 2 chiefs can talk more about that when we get to their departments here shortly. But it does leave us with, we project, a modest surplus this year of $80,000. So for every year we've come to you and say, well, we've got a substantial structural deficit, and that's something we need to try to address. And then this last year we were successful in getting legislative approval to put a tax before the voters, which they did, which we told the voters we would use in part to increase manpower in the fire department and the police department, and in part to work on that structural deficit. And we have been able now to do both of those things and not have in this year's budget a proposed structural deficit, which is a very good thing. So the general fund balance at the end of fiscal year 18, we think is going to be about $11 million. That'll be about 72% of our fiscal year general fund 18 general fund expenditures. Our policy is that we have at least 50%. So again, pretty good shape in terms of our general fund balance now and where we expect to be in terms of revenues and expenditures for the year. And any other questions before I talk a little bit about some of the other funds, starting with gaming? Okay. Well, again, it wasn't my intention to go through projects in the gaming fund tonight, but just to give you kind of an overview of the gaming fund and where it stands. This is, again, the repository of funds from gross revenues and admissions at Harrah's Casino. It is our primary source for funding capital improvements or extraordinary services in the general fund. And one thing we have tried to do this year, again, because we've had the ability to do that, the general fund, is move things that were recurring, regular expenditures, which we were funding out of the gaming fund, and move them into the general fund. And we've been pretty successful in doing that. There are not too many now recurring expenditures in the gaming fund. The casino activity has decreased in recent years. That has affected both general fund and gaming fund revenues, as I've spoken about. Again, looking at gaming fund revenues, back in 2007, they were about $10.4 million. This year, in 2017, we're projecting about $7.1 million. So again, that has decreased, about a little over $3 million since 2007. That's about a 32% decrease since 2007. So again, it's a source of concern, something to think about, something to, hope that eventually hits a stable level and stops decreasing. Still, can't complain too much about $7 million in gaming fund revenues. We do spend these mostly on capital expenditures, some other special expenditures. This year, something new that's in this budget, I have provided it to you once before, but is a 5-year forecast of gaming fund revenues. That's in the very back of your budget book, and that helps us to determine, given where we think that the revenue sources are going to be, what we can afford out of the gaming fund. We do, of course, use it to fund a lot of very important projects for the city, but we want to make sure that we will continue to have adequate funds to do that in the coming years. So hopefully that'll be a useful tool as you look at the gaming fund. I'll move on. Yes, sir.
Do we have any idea of, with the new businesses coming to town and the new development, stuff like that, we will get some revenue off of them. We haven't gave all of it away, have we, as far as tax abatements? And
Well, so we are looking at tax increment financing in that area. That'll be coming back to you in October. The TIF Commission just acted on it. A tax increment financing involves a 100% property tax abatement for 23 years and a 50% sales tax abatement.
Oh, okay, 50.
So, 50% of the revenue there we would expect to receive, but we would be turning back 50% of it. But yes, to answer the question, we should see additional sales tax revenue once those retail businesses begin operating and collecting.
We have no idea what that will be. It could be a lot, it could be very, very small to start off with.
Right. We tend to wait until we have some experience before we begin budgeting revenue. So once we see what our revenues are after they've been operating a little while, then we'll factor that into the next year's budget. But yes, at this point, we really would have no idea. I wouldn't want to speculate. But I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to sales tax revenue from Mayorado Jewelry. I think.
Oh yeah.
I think we should see.
There'll be money there. It just depends on how much.
All right.
From all of it.
So we should have next year, when I present the fiscal year 2019 budget to you, some good experience in how much sales tax is being collected, and be able to give you hopefully a pretty decent estimate of a revenue estimate from that.
That golfing program is supposed to go over quite good too.
I'm sorry, what?
The golfing.
Right.
That's a big thing in the country nowadays. So
now that isn't set to open until July 2018 at the earliest, so I don't know that we're going to have a whole lot of revenue in 2018 from that.
Now, I can understand like the jewelry store, they've got their sales tax on each item, but something like the golf thing,
I'm not sure about
There's
how
no-
much is, right, so I mean,
Of
they sell
food,
food and beverage, that's a big part of what they,
well, yeah.
of their
okay,
revenue,
it-
but I don't know that we would be getting sales tax necessarily from the
the golf.
playing of the game itself.
Do they sell equipment too?
So there are a lot of ifs right now on
Yeah.
that, and we'll have, as I say, we'll have a better idea if it's been operating for a little while.
I think it's not going to amount to zero, to a negative. It's going to be a plus. It's
Yes,
got
sir.
to be a plus.
Yes, sir. We wouldn't be doing it if there weren't a benefit.
Okay.
Okay. Again, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the transportation fund. Transportation fund is supported by a half-cent sales tax. It accounts for personnel who maintain the city's right-of-way, fixed route, and on-call bus service within the city and the city's streetlight system. So actually, bus service, our payment to the Kansas City Area Transit Authority constitute about 18% of the whole transportation fund budget. And our cost for streetlights, which we pay to KCP&L, is about 15%. So that's a big chunk of that particular fund right there that we don't have a whole lot of control over. One thing that I do want to kind of point to with transportation fund, something for us to look at in the long term, is that we are budgeting in this year's budget about a $400,000 operating deficit. That includes a number of capital projects, and that will leave this fund, according to our figures, with a fund balance at the end of the year about 27%. Now, our policy as city is in these funds, all the funds except for the general fund, to have at least 25%. So we're getting very close to that amount. So this fund is under a little bit of stress, and it's something for us to take a look at. A couple of things, though, that I would point out that might make things a little bit rosier than I've just outlined. First of all, as we were preparing for tonight, we did realize that the amount that we have budgeted for KCATA, the Kansas City Area Transit Authority for bus services, which we are showing at about $464,000, we actually mistakenly computed a 13-month into that. So that's actually going to be about $36,000 less. And in fact, I would propose that when we present to you the final budget for adoption, that we go ahead and reduce that, because that was simply a miscalculation on our part. So that's about $36,000 better off than we'll be in that fund than we are showing here in this document before you. Also, we budgeted an 8% increase in KCATA fees. Last year's increase was 8%, but I'm hoping it won't be that much this year. So that since it's such a healthy chunk of the budget, if it's less than that, that would also be a savings. But we do need to keep an eye on transportation fund. We also fund tree maintenance out of this fund, because trees are in for street trees in our right-of-way. And we are going to try to look very carefully at that and see if we can find some savings there as well. Another thing that we might consider doing is that we do have a substantial capital project in this fund, a downtown sidewalk extension for putting sidewalk and streetscape improvements in the area that's bounded by Howell, 18th, and Fayette. We don't have sidewalks or anything there now, and we think that would be a good improvement for the city. We're showing it in the transportation fund, but that could be a gaming fund project. So if we also wanted to ease some of the stress on the transportation fund, we could do it by those means. That might be something that I look to talk to you about later in the year. If you don't have any other questions about that, I'll move on quickly to convention and tourism.
Nobody's come up with any kind of a different idea about the circulator bus. That thing's expensive.
Well, we actually are going to bring something to you soon. That's something actually Councilmember Stefan asked us to do.
Oh.
We were a little late getting it started, but we're putting the finishing touches on it now. I just want to get a little bit of information yet from KCATA about their ridership on certain days and times. But then we have done an analysis. Councilmember Stefan asked us to take a look at what it might cost if we were to do the service ourselves. So I'll have that for you. I can tell you, though, my initial results, Mike Smith did the study largely. Doesn't indicate great savings if we were to do it ourselves. It is expensive.
Yeah.
One thing that we might look at, and we can talk about that, I propose to have a work session just on this topic with you, but one thing that we might look at is reducing the number of hours that we offer. One thing that we looked at is what Excelsior Springs does. They offer about 29 hours of service a week. We have 94. Maybe that's more than we need to offer. So that's something that we might be able to think about that might reduce our costs.
Well, I don't like to interrupt you on that.
That's all right, sir.
Excelsior Springs, if people go from point A to point B, and point B is a business or something, the business makes some type of reimbursement of some type, I believe. I'm not positive.
Wasn't aware of that.
Well, when you look into it.
I will, yeah, because we hadn't, when we talked to them, we hadn't seen them list that as a revenue source, but I'll take another look at that. Moving on to convention and tourism. This is a fund that's funded by a 5% hotel motel tax that was approved by voters in 2012. We do think revenues from that are going to increase a little bit, about 10% in the coming year. So hotel and motel usage continues to go up. We use this to fund some major capital projects, which we can talk about next week, as well as other things such as Snake Saturday and some of the Parks and Recreation programs that we talked about a little bit earlier tonight. The Community Center Fund is a fund that was an enterprise fund and unfunded the operations of the North Kansas City Community Center back when we operated it. We did make an arrangement with the YMCA in 2015. They now are running the operations in that building to the extent that the facility realizes annual operating surpluses. We would share in those with the Y. So far, it is still running deficits, but in 2018, we're looking at a transfer of about $140,000 from the gaming fund to make up the deficit. So we were looking at deficits of about $1.3 million back before we made this deal. Now we're looking at next year about $140,000. We also budgeted another $100,000 out of there for capital repairs or things that might be necessary. Still, even if we look at about $250,000 next year, it appears to have been something that we did achieve some substantial savings by making that arrangement.
How's their renovation coming along over there?
Going pretty well. They are. Their goal, our goal, is to get this done by the end of the calendar year because they make their membership push in January, and I'm hearing it's going to be tight. But there was a tight schedule already, so if it isn't quite complete at the end of the calendar year, it'll be close. So certainly we'll be having a big ribbon cutting and everything else when that time comes. But I hear the project's going well. Haven't so far gotten a lot of change orders or anything from the contractor, so I think it's going smoothly. In our communications fund, this is a fund that now, but since we've turned over operations of Link City to Data Shack LLC, we use to make up any operating deficits that they have. We share in operating deficits that Link City may have. In 2018, showing a transfer from the gaming fund of about $64,000 for that. So again, not bad in terms of kind of deficits we were looking at before we made that arrangement with them. We have limited ourselves in our agreement with them to losses of $150,000, and just to be on the conservative side, that's what we budgeted in the communications fund each year. Our water fund is an enterprise fund. It's budgeted to charges for services to water customer. This budget, if you look at the amount that we're budgeting, is a little bit skewed because we're showing $7 million out of our water treatment plant project is being spent in the next fiscal year. I have a feeling at this point, based upon where we are, it's not going to be anything close to that, but it tends to skew this fund a bit in terms of what it's doing on an operating basis. But the fund is pretty healthy. It was projected to have a surplus of, it's now projected to have a surplus of about $945,000 in this fiscal year. Originally, we budgeted a surplus of about $592,000, and we're budgeted to end with a fund balance of about $3,940,000. And I talked about our goal of having at least 25% of operating expenditures. We're looking at having about 239% of operating expenditures in the water fund at the end of the next fiscal year. So certainly it was a wise move not to increase water rates, as the council was thinking about that earlier in the year. If this trend continues, it might be even possible to reduce rates. water fund is very healthy at the moment. Yes, sir.
That's great that the water fund is that strong. All of the water plant renovations and all of that is coming out of the gaming then, right? We wouldn't use any of the reserve here or
That's right.
anything like that to
That's correct.
fund it? Okay.
Yes, sir. Let's talk about water pollution control. We do have something going on in that fund that may pop up with you later on in the coming months that you should be aware of. Our water pollution control fund is also an enterprise fund. It's a business fund responsible for funding the city's sanitary sewer and stormwater systems and also preventing the introduction of pollutants into our groundwater. It's funded through charges for services for sewer customers, both industrial and residential. And in fiscal year 2017, we actually budgeted a deficit of about $522,000, and we're now showing a surplus of about $416,000. That's a difference of about $940,000. And so why is that? What's going on there that we would see that? We think we know what that reason is. There are largely two items. First of all, we spent a lot less in infrastructure this year in a number of areas, but the big one has to do with our sewer lateral lining project. This is a project that we had a presentation to you on where we're looking at trying to correct leaks that exist in our system where a person's sewer lateral hits our own main. And we, I think, thought there was maybe a greater need than there has turned out to be as we've been doing investigating through video. We budgeted $300,000 this year. Now we only expect to spend about $80,000. We are greatly decreasing the amount that we're proposing to spend next year in this area. We are doing a reassessment, Pat and I are, of that whole program because we just don't see the need that we originally had anticipated there. So we spent a lot less on infrastructure, and that's one reason that we're looking at a large surplus in the WPC fund. But another reason is that our sewer charges that we budgeted to pay to Kansas City, Missouri, because we do send all of our sewage to Kansas City, Missouri, were far less than budgeted, about $429,000 we're showing less than we budgeted. And that's odd because if our charges to Kansas City were so much lower than we budgeted, then we would also expect to see lower revenues from rates, but we're not. Our rates are relatively on, our revenues from that source are relatively on track for what we budgeted. So we think we know what the issue is. As you may recall, we did receive, we had a consent order from the US EPA earlier this year regarding some things that they found in the way that we were monitoring our significant industrial users, and they required us to do certain things. And we've worked very carefully to do that, and they're happy with our progress. There is one thing that's keeping us from finalizing our consent order with EPA, and that is that we realized as we were working on these things that if you take what we're getting from our significant industrial users, we have 9 or 10 of those, 9 of those throughout the city, and you add up what they're sending us, and we have data from each one of those. It adds up to more than we are showing is going through our master meter and sending to Kansas City. That can't be. Problem is we have a faulty meter. We've determined. We first tried to renovate that meter but that did not prove successful. We're now working on replacing that meter. But the result is that we have probably been underpaying Kansas City substantially. We have been reporting to them less going through that meter than there has probably been going through that meter. And we're going to need to correct that. We're going to probably need to make some kind of a back payment to them. What that would be is still to be negotiated. I couldn't tell you, but the magnitude is pretty substantial. As I indicated, we budgeted, we expect to pay more than $429,000 less than we had anticipated.
They audit that in any way to make some determination? I mean,
they didn't catch it, but we have reported it to them, as is our obligation. We've told them of the problem. We've told them what we're doing to try to fix it, and I'm sure that they are going to want to talk to us about trying to estimate the amount that we should have paid and correcting that, and I would be bringing that to you at a future time. That could be a very substantial budget amendment. and I want you to know about it now, and that's the issue. Just a few of our other funds, and then we'll start getting into departments. We do have a retiree health insurance fund that was created in 2011 when we put in a retirement resignation incentive program, and we expect that to be closed out in 2021. That'll be at the point where all of the subsidies that were approved by the council will have been completed. We have a Northgate Capital Project Fund. That's the fund that collects the funds from tax increment financing that was used to construct Northgate Village. That was implemented in phases from 2004 to 2009. We'll be collecting revenues into this fund for 23 years up until 2032 in the final case. And the redevelopment activities are ongoing. We really only have one remaining phase to go, and that's City View 2. That's the block that's sort of over there on Swift, the undeveloped block now. And we do have the amount to for the city infrastructure to serve them budgeted at about $1.7 million. So we hope that we will see activity there in the coming year. Lastly, we have a fund that just houses certain restricted funds that we are not allowed to spend out of the general fund that come in from various sources, and that is the very last fund that's presented to you, which is available for use. We haven't budgeted anything out of that, but one thing that we do have is a significant amount of money in what the Crummett Beautification Fund. That's a fund that we do get revenue from occasionally that can be used for beautification projects in the city, and working on putting together a group that would be able to look at possible projects here in the city that we might be able to use to fund out of that fund.
Could we use that for signage?
No, sir, I don't think so. They are pretty strict.
Yeah.
We have to ask them before we can use that fund, and they have told us no before, but no, that doesn't meet our criteria. They'd like it to be for beautification according to their criteria. That completes my overview, and with that, I propose to go back to the general fund, and we can just sort of hit the highlights of some of the departments, if you're ready. Okay. Well, beginning with administration, this is the department which houses the different functions. First of all, the mayor and city council, administration, including city clerk, human resources, finance department, information technology, city councilor, and economic development activities are all funded out of administration. Nothing too significant in this fund, but we do list some of the significant budgetary items page of the budget. If you have any questions about that. Municipal court, again, no significant changes really in this particular budget. Its budget comprises about 2 3/4 full-time equivalent employee. For the fire department, I'll call on Gary Fisher.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I will try to make this as quick as possible. Our budget starts on page 41, reflects a personnel roster chart where you see an additional 4 people added to this year's budget. I would say that the 3 of those positions would be firefighter, but 1 is a management analyst. We would be holding off on that position until after the first of the year. The new fire chief comes on board and makes a determination of what direction you provide him or her at that time in terms of the accreditation and those kinds of things. So there won't be any activity with that management analyst until after the first of the year. Wanted to also mention overtime. We have a reduction of $15,000 in the overtime line. I say that with some hesitation because of the turnover we've had over the last year or so. We've had a significant amount of overtime that we've paid out. So even with the addition of the 3 firefighters, we still think that we will see a net gain on this. But I just wanted to just throw that caution flag out there that we don't know what that will be until we see some of this turnover slowing down a little bit and within the department. Professional services, some of this was budgeted this year, and again, for the strategic planning, we wanted to wait until the new fire chief comes on and take advantage of that. So that's been rolled over this year. And then the operational cost, the subscription cost to Kansas City Fire was also in last year's budget. And so it's rolled over for this year as well.
So you did not use any of the professional services?
Professional services is put in there. We have negotiations coming up with Local 42.
Okay.
And so that's put in there as a just-in-case thing.
Okay.
I think we spent $12,000 last year in professional services fees. Not last year, year before, for attorney's fees.
But I think you also had a strategic plan that was budgeted this year, not occurring this year, so we have it now showing
So
in
it's
fiscal
rolling
year
over to next year.
2018.
That was my question
Yeah.
on that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Jumping down to uniforms and apparel, we've increased that budget line $10,000 this year, again, because of the turnover that we're seeing within the department. And then on page 46, the software maintenance, we've taken all of our software contracts and our maintenance, software maintenance agreements, and we put them all into one account so we can better track where those dollars are going. They've kind of been spread out through all over the budget as they've kind of come online, you know, a piece at a time with our electronic patient reporting software, then with our prevention inspection software. And so they've kind of piecemealed that in. We've tried to put this together in one place so we can kind of track, keep where all that's going. And then minor equipment, we have $33,000 budgeted in there for an increase of $14,000 over last year. And there's a list on page 47 of what that minor equipment consists of. And then we have our capital outlay as well of $25,000. And with that, I would be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
What do you attribute the turnover in people? Is it salaries or?
Yes. We have lost 10 people over the last 2 years, 5 this year. That's 20% of our workforce. All are citing salaries. Now, I think that there are other things that come into play with that, but there have been a number of departments around the region that have been hiring, and they're providing bonuses, and they've got very accelerated pay scales, and you know, and so these young guys come in. I mean, you remember a couple of years ago we were losing all the retirees. Now we're losing all the guys that are like 2 years on, 3 years, that they see these dollars hanging out there at these other places, and some of it is a significant difference. So I don't really have the answer to that, but we do exit interviews, and the issue is salaries.
We do pay according to what we've agreed to in the collective bargaining agreement with Local 42.
They all belong to the same union, don't they?
I'm sorry?
They all belong to the same union, or?
No. CJC took 3. Lee Summit took 1 or 2. Shawnee has taken 1 or 2. Kansas City took 1 or 2. Where else did they go, Dave? Who? Independence has taken a couple, 3. So it's kind of spread out.
I think one thing, to correct me if I'm wrong, that we're hearing is our starting salaries are pretty decent. But when they look at the top end, they're seeing higher top ends in some departments. So I imagine Local 42 is going to want to talk about, I mean, they propose, you know, largely propose the modified step system that we do have in place with the numbers we have in place. They actually came to me a little while ago and said, hey, want to renegotiate in the middle of the term? And I said, no, you know, we can talk at the end of the 3-year term. But I think that that's going to be something they're going to be pointing out to us. And it's something we're gonna have to take a look at when we get into negotiations with them.
It's always money.
If there's nothing else on fire, we'll turn to police.
Thank you, sir. Police Department budget is primarily the changes in it. Many of those revolve around the increase in staffing. As mentioned earlier, we're going to be adding 6 police officers in the coming fiscal year and 1 civilian employee, which will allow us to restore the records clerk position in our lobby. We're moving forward in that process, and at this point in time, we have 4 individuals identified that will be coming on board October 2nd. I got it as close to the 1st of October as I could, and the civilian employee has been identified as well. So we're moving forward in that process. But those changes also have then an impact on our salary lines, our benefit lines, and our uniform line. Much like Gary said, when you bring these extra people on, you're going to have to outfit them. And our uniform line is simply for the cloth and leather goods. There's a separate line that we'll talk about next week in our capitals to handle the, what I would refer to as the big ticket items to go along with outfitting those individuals, the handheld radios, body cameras, handguns, and tasers. So that's a separate line that you'll see next week. Our training line went up this year as well for a couple of reasons. We are restoring specialized units in the coming year, and with those specialized units come the training requirements to get those specializations in place. And so we anticipate that we will be sending some people to training this coming year to help fill those specialized units. We also, in this budget, there was a move, as Mr. Berlin mentioned earlier, some of the items that had existed in the gaming fund, some of the recurring items, we're moving back to the general fund. One of those is in our budget now, which is the support of the FBI's Regional Computer Forensics Lab. That is $44,500 that we have been taking out of gaming, I believe, since its inception. But since that's a recurring item now, it has been moved back into the general fund and shows in our budget. Another item that is significant in its change is our range supply line. If you recall, I came to you approximately a year ago and discussed to begin charging outside agencies to use our range. The revenues that have been collected from that, we've been tracking that, and that will now allow us to have sufficient funds to offset the cost of replacing the rubber curtain that exists at the range, the Linatex, that prevents shrapnel from coming back on the shooters when they're up close on the target line. So that line jumped quite a bit, but really it's a net zero impact because of the revenue that we're now taking in from the outside agencies. Other than that, there's small adjustments up and down in some of the lines based upon historical performance. Our gasoline line, we brought it down a little bit because gas prices have remained low, plus the transition of the fleet from 8-cylinder vehicles down to 6- and 4-cylinder vehicles has had an impact on our fuel consumption. Our detention line, we reduced it somewhat too, just because of historical performance. Quite frankly, in both of those lines, if we run out, we'll be coming back for more money because we need gas and we need someplace to put the bad guys. So if we need to talk to you about that somewhere down the road, we will. But historically, we believe those numbers are appropriate. Other than that, there's no significant changes to our budget.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next couple of departments are Pat Halvers, Public Works Administration, and Buildings and Grounds.
There are 3 persons, employees in administration. There's no notable changes from 2017. In fact, the total proposed budget is $326,000, which is up only $2,400. So, unless there's any questions, we'll move on.
Who's your GIS technician? Is that Chris Cooper?
Yes, his title's engineering tech / GIS specialist. Buildings and Grounds?
Yes.
Of the notable changes from last year, custodial services, the city went into contract with a new vendor, and it went up $5,700 from last year. Now it's $29,500 for those services. Building maintenance, we are fortunate to have our superintendent of municipal services, Dwayne Maruzars, who's an expert with heating and air conditioning, and he is going to train and take charge of installing filters, changing filters on the rooftops air conditioning units, and that's going to save $10,000. So that will start when the current contract with EMI goes away in January of 2018. So overall, we're going to spend $300,000 less, at least projected to. And that's all of the notable items for Buildings and Grounds.
Thank you, Pat. I'll turn it over to Sarah Copeland to talk about community development.
Good evening. Community development comprises long-range planning, building permitting and inspections, and code enforcement. For next year, we are proposing to add half of a person. We'd like to have a planning intern with us for the year, part-time during the school year and full-time in the summer to help us with some grunt work to help us take on some more in-house projects next year. When you look at the rest of our budget, we have just a couple of changes. One is an increase in our salary line of about $15,000 for that intern position. You'll also see an increase in the line called Public Relations in KCBC. This is moving our payment to the North Kansas City Business Council from the gaming fund into the general fund and putting it here in this section of the budget. We've also increased the planning and zoning line from $16,000 to $20,000. Again, as we look next year, we've got a couple of projects, one being a parking management plan and also working on the residential 353 tax abatement program that we anticipate needing some outside assistance on, and so that line item has gone up just a little bit. Beyond that, we have a few line items that have increased slightly. Office supplies has increased just slightly. We have some more expensive supplies that we've gone through more quickly this year, like sticky backed paper. And we're also increasing publications and subscriptions slightly because we're anticipating buying new ICC code books for code revisions. But other than that, minor increases. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
If I could add one item that isn't really in Sarah's department, but which is shown as an expense in community development. This is another one of those items that we had been funding out of gaming that we've now moved into the general fund. It just seemed like community development was the logical place for it. And that's the annual payment that we make to the North Kansas City Business Council for the services that they provide. And that's $27,500, which used to be out of gaming, which again, we're trying to get those recurring expenses into the general fund. It's now showing in community development.
Can I ask a question? I don't know whether it's appropriate for this, but on this chapter, or that 353 abatement thing that we're trying to push through, my question is, okay, the next step is a blight study.
No, we've done that.
The blight study?
We presented that to you in August.
Okay, so that's done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my question is this. If somebody wanted to condemn property, do they need to go through another blight study, or will this blight study?
No, if someone wanted to come to you to ask you to undertake eminent domain, they would need to do a study of that particular property. Because what we've done is said that these areas meet the qualifications to make an application under Chapter 353 for tax abatement, not that an individual property is blighted itself.
Well, let's take, for example, say the school wanted more property, and on the north side of 26 there, it's that probably could be considered blighted. Okay, before they could condemn that, they have to go back through their own blight study, or this blight study we had won't affect that.
I'm not sure that I'm a good person to answer that question, but my understanding is that what we have done has not declared a particular piece of property to be blighted. What it's done is said that the neighborhood as a whole meets the qualifications under state law, but not an individual piece of property.
Can we?
But I'm not a lawyer, so.
We find out for sure about.
Sure, that is, I believe that is what he indicated to us. Just to remind you of where we are, as Sarah said, blight study is done, but we don't believe we blighted any individual property. And the council hasn't made a declaration, that was just a study. You asked us for more information on how this would be implemented, if it was implemented, and to bring that back to you before anything occurred. So that's where we stand right now. But we'll be happy to confirm that we've not harmed any individual property, and would not, if the council elected to proceed, that we would not be by doing that.
Okay, good. Well, I know there's been some concern expressed about that.
Reasonable concern. Any other questions on community development? The last department in the general fund is interdepartmental. That covers a variety of things that cover all departments, not any particular one. It includes a number of IT expenditures, which is why Stephen is there if you have any IT questions. Again, a couple of things that I would note that we have moved over from gaming into what seemed to be the logical general fund department, in this case interdepartmental. One, the employee wellness program. That was a recurring regular expense, about $25,100, now showing in the interdepartmental area. And then a much larger expenditure, trash collection. We've been funding that out of gaming for years. I've always wanted to try to be able to get it out of gaming because, again, we've always said that gaming is there for one-time expenditures, capital projects, not for ongoing. This was really an ongoing operating expenditure. So we are now showing that in this department, interdepartmental, in the amount that we paid last year. Probably actually end up being a little bit less when we bring it to you, but we are now funding that out of the general fund.
That's trash collection.
Yes, sir. Yes, our contract.
For years, they told me, oh, no, we can't do that.
Well, we really couldn't because the general fund balance couldn't take it, but now it can. Now we're in pretty good shape.
I mean, no, it was in the general fund, and they said they couldn't take it out of the gaming. And then all of a sudden, then they started taking it out of the gaming, and I wondered, how did that happen?
Well, you can do anything you want. I mean, seriously. I mean, it's a council policy, but the council can always change its policy.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to have moved it out of there.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions? Stephen, did you have any presentation you wanted to make, or if you have any questions about anything else that you see?
I don't have anything specific. I mean, I can go through the items if you like, but basically just a couple of upgrades to existing things, simplifying our web security certificates. I'd like to add some more Wi-Fi capabilities to our buildings, possibly even add guest Wi-Fi access. I'd like to update the council, the Channel 2 video that we run with some software to allow us to run more videos, do scheduling. I think we could really make Channel 2 a great tool. We could do really all sorts of stuff with the right software. We could do public service announcements, more dynamic content. We could do voiceovers. Really make it a dynamic thing. So, other than that, just like I said, a couple of routine maintenance, memory upgrades, and that sort of thing. So I can answer any questions if you have, though.
Here. All right. Well, that concludes our very brief recap of expenditures in the general fund. So we'll move on to some of the other funds now, beginning with transportation fund. And again, I did a little overview of that, but I'd go ahead and turn it over to Pat to talk about some of the expenditures in the transportation fund.
Following the study and the revision of administrative fees, our budget went up $14,469. Tree maintenance, that's the big story in transportation for this upcoming year. as you recall, well, you may not recall, but in 2015, we started the Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan, and we did our first round of treating the ash trees that were in good condition and taking out approximately 40 per year that were in bad condition. Instead of taking them all out, we're doing it each year. So anyway, this is the third year, and every 3 years you're supposed to treat them. So in 2018, in the spring, we're going to treat the emerald ash borers that are in good condition, and that's expected to be $46,000. In addition, we're going to take out 40 trees, ash trees that are in bad condition, and that's approximately $25,000. So added to that is the general tree maintenance program that we have, which is $65,000. So that all totals $150,000. But it's only every 3 years that we get this spike when we have to treat the ash borers. So that's the only really notable two items. Mr. Berlin covered the KCATA.
Yeah, we do have a lot of street trees in the city. So tree maintenance costs us money, especially when we have a big storm and we have to bring you a $37,000 budget amendment as we did last night. But that's, I mean, it's one of the things that makes our city neat, but it's also one of those things that that is an expense.
Are we gonna get all the trees replaced that we've got, like down on Swift and stuff like that this year?
Yeah, we have to wait till fall to put in new trees. That's the best chance for living.
I got 2 or 3 people down there hounding me about trees.
Well, you don't put them in while leaves are on. Yeah. Just transporting can kill them.
But once fall comes, what are our plans?
Our plans to replace, I think that we've got 23 that are needing replacement right now to infill, and the ones that are down that need to be infilled, and then continue. In the early spring, we can replace trees too. So every tree that's taken down is being replaced for the most part. But we're not replacing them with ash trees.
Okay.
All right. Convention and Tourism Fund. Again, we're using that for some pretty major capital projects, which we can talk more about next week. But the list of all the things that we spend Convention and Tourism Funds monies on is kind of recapped on page 136 of your budget. And it does include Snake Saturday, Friday in the Park, the daytime concert series, as well as the nighttime concert series that are both operated by Parks and Recreation, and the Mayor's Tree Lighting event. The car show, the summer car show that runs once a month. The Arts in the Park Festival, that is, they have asked for an increase this year. They received $15,000 last year. They asked for a raise this year, so there's $20,000, which is budgeted in this fund for that festival. And the Swift Mile Street Festival, which is this coming weekend, and for which we contract with Northland Festivals. So that is, we cover both capital projects and others, kind of special event types of things, primarily out of this budget, as well as infrastructure. According to law, we can use the funds that we receive from the hotel motel tax on tourism and infrastructure improvements. And we can define tourism pretty broadly. So, any questions about that? I talked about the community center fund a little bit earlier. In general, this fund is doing pretty well. The big expenditure this year, about $2.5 million for the renovation, but we won't be seeing that in next year's budget. But when I think of what is the community center costing us, I usually think of it in terms of what we're transferring from the gaming fund in order to balance the community center fund. And this year, that amount, we're looking at about $240,000. And that assumes that we'll have $100,000 in capital expenditures, which we may or may not have. And communications fund I also touched on, and again, we're just using the fund balance that we have. We're anticipating a transfer in from the gaming fund of about $64,000 that would be needed to balance this fund and pay both some back deficits that we have from KC Fiber, which operates Link City, as well as the deficit that we budgeted this year. As you know, we're still in negotiations with them over some things, so we've been holding back some amounts that we do calculate that we owe them until we've seen if we can come up with a settlement. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Pat to talk about the water fund and the WPC fund.
In the water fund, again, the revised administration fees have increased our budget $46,474. Kansas City Water, those are the emergency water connections that we have with Kansas City. We have 2 of them. One of them is new, as you may know, on Vernon. That increase is $6,500, mainly because of our new one connection on Vernon. Chemicals. Every year, the price of chemicals go up a lot, and especially chlorine. And a lot of that they blame on transportation. Sometimes they say shortages, but you can just count on that. This year, we're projecting $15,000 increase in chemicals treatments for our water. And vehicle maintenance, several of our trucks and machinery are getting older, and so we're projecting $6,300 in repairs for older models of our trucks, mainly, some of our equipment. That's the notable ones that I pointed out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, we'll go to WPC, Water Pollution Control. Again, administrative fees for collecting bills and everything else that the administration department does has increased the budget by $31,179. Sewer charge to KCMO, that is a substantial amount of our expenses. I think it's somewhat close to 80% of all of our expenses. There's no change, but I just thought I'd mention that it's budgeted this year for $3,300,000.
And as I noted before, we think we made the amount that we're showing that for 17, $2,870,000 that we expect to spend, we think is probably an underpayment. So that's one reason that we want to keep the amount at $3,000,003.
That's all I have for operational, notable operational increases.
The other funds are fairly limited. The Northgate Capital and Projects Fund I mentioned before, we do budget the entire amount that we would expect to spend for infrastructure to serve the phases of development. There's really only one phase that's still scheduled, and that's City View Phase 2. Our developer is currently indicating that he would expect to begin that in the spring of 2018. So we have budgeted the entire amount that we would spend for infrastructure to serve that development, assuming it comes in. And really, I think we've gone through it pretty quickly tonight, but our intention was to focus primarily on our gaming, our capital projects next week, but that I think we've hit the highlights of operations. But do you have any questions on any aspect of the budget that you'd like us to touch on that we haven't touched on so far?
I'm happy.
All right. Well, we will then continue next week, Wednesday the 13th at 6:00 p.m.
All righty.
Thank you.
Do we have to, this is not a